A few hours had passed since the interview, and Tony was wandering the halls like a lost child in a department store. Much of the floor creaked as he moved, and some of the walls were stained from years of neglect. From what Eve had said, her parents had passed away in a car accident when she was about 13. She was in a boarding school at the time, overseas. Under her trustee's direction, she would remain in boarding schools until she had reached the age of 18, when she could return to the States and decide what to do with the inheritance and manor at the time. On turning 18, her trustee suggested further schooling, and she got a degree in art history. When she finally did return, she found Mortimer still doing his best to keep the manor intact, but the trustee had not devoted any money or manpower towards assisting him. Tony asked why she hadn't simply gone to a relative's home after she had been earned. She and Mortimer exchanged a look, but did not answer. He was still curious, but he guessed that it was still a sensitive subject, and let it drop. She told him that she had just moved back to the manor last year, which told him that she was a mere year older than him and gave him an idea of the magnitude of their search before hiring him. For some unknown reason, she did not contract a company to do the repairs, but instead put out local ads. And then she had denied all other applicants until he had arrived. They certainly had the money to have gone another route, but he wasn't going to press for answers at this time. He was just glad to have gotten the job. They had left him alone after he had asked for directions to their bathroom, and so he wandered around, taking note of the various things he would have to repair. He made a mental checklist as he went around. Thankfully, there were very few pests, with the exception of a lone rat he saw and the varying spiders. It appeared that, despite the termite holes in the tree outside, whatever chemical sealer the people used when building the manor years ago had worked superbly. One of the hallways there seemed to be a bit of ash residue between the floorboards, and one room had a few charred supports where a wall evidently once stood. More signs of solid workmanship, since the ceiling above it did not need those supports to stay aloft. It is possible even that the room had been created later, since that section of the house appeared to have been an addition, the wood stained slightly off in hue. Eventually, on the second floor, he reached a room with double doors that appeared to have the least amount of damage. As he paused before it, about to turn the doorknob, a creak sounded behind him. "You're not as stealthy as you think, Morty." As he turned to face him, Tony saw his face was not only slightly sneering, but seemed to be filled with worry.
"I wouldn't go in there if I were you."
Sarcastically, Tony gave a crooked grin, tilting his head as he answered, "Why, is it haunted or something?" Mortimer started to walk off, but before he got far he answered,
"Worse."
Tony wondered what could be worse, but said nothing at first. When he opened his mouth, eyes staring at the doorknob, Mortimer spoke again.
"That's the mistress's room."
"Thanks for the warning," he said, taking his hand off the knob and turning to thank him.
"Listen up, young whelp. I did not tell you for your benefit."
Mortimer snapped, turning his head and neck, as if irritated at the mere notion of giving the boy something to be thankful for. Tony leaned back in surprise as the man continued.
"You are detestable to me. However, the mistress decided to hire you."
A scowl darkened his face.
"Despite my advice. Since she did, I do not want your ignorance to cause me problems."
He began to walk off when Tony asked out of curiosity, "Like what?" The gray-haired man turned his head back, his face morbidly gloomy as if recalling a life of torment.
"It might be better if you didn't know."
Turning away again, he walked off, increasing his pace more than before.
"Well, seeing as I have prevented a potential disaster, I shall take my leave."
"Morty, wait." The man's face twitched again, still out of sight from Tony's eyes as he seethed.
"My name is Mortimer, not Morty. I only allow the mistress to call me that because I have worked for her family for a long time, and she pays me for my services. You do not."
"Mortimer, then, I'm sorry if you don't like me, but we do have to work together, so could we at least try to help each other out a little?" Tony replied, extending his hand in peace.
"That was very well phrased, and humble."
"So do you think we can do that?" Tony asked hopefully.
"No."
Tony watched as the man walked down the hall into darkness, and when the man was completely out of view, he lifted up his bangs with his left hand, scratching at the top of his head in confusion. He rose a lone eyebrow while speaking to the air. "Okay." Wandering about the manor, Tony was beginning to realize how much work he'd be doing. Certainly, Mortimer would be assisting him, but he had his work cut out for him. Several floorboards needed replacement, a few walls had some holes in them, and one room smelled like urine. There was evidence here and there that during her absence some vagrants had tagged it and caused other vandalism. Mortimer and Eve did their best to cover up the damage, but they obviously didn't know what they were doing. Those employer probably could have torn down the manor and rebuilt it in less time than it took to repair it, It was obviously of great sentimental value. He could understand that. Though his work would be tough, he was being paid a reasonable wage for it, in addition to the living quarters and utilities that would be covered. The manor itself was 3 stories tall, 4 if you counted the cellar. Eve had told him that much at least, and seeing it from the front he had gotten a glimpse of the sheer magnitude of it, but it was nearly half as deep as it was wide. It even had a 25-meter, 6-lane indoor pool behind the garage. It wasn't Olympic, but it was fairly large for a private pool. He was so lost in thought about the tasks ahead of him, making a mental list, that he didn't notice the ajar cellar door when he walked past it. When the wind blew through an open window, however, the door creaked open wider behind him. He walked backwards and looked at the door with trepidation. He crept up and put an ear to it, listening carefully. From down below he could hear another creak and deep thud. "It's just the house settling, there's no need to worry," he thought as he put a hand to the doorknob.
Right?
Although they had been in the manor for a little over a year now, Eve had told them that occasionally they came across new damage to the building that was obviously not a sign of its decay. They thought perhaps there might be a squatter on the grounds, and if not that, some hormonally challenged youths who were exploring it in an attempt to prove themselves brave. Whatever the source of these disturbances was, they were unwelcome, and Tony knew that until the manor was close to its former glory, it would be up to him and Mortimer to keep it safe. They pushed the door open more, and its rusty hinges heaved underneath the weight of its ancient wood. He stared down into the shadows. A small gulp formed naturally as he called out to the shadows.
Hello? Anyone down there?
A large spider was clearly visible skittering around on one of the support beams, while another could be seen lowering itself on its string. He didn't hate spiders. He knew that they were a vital part of the ecology. They did creep him out slightly, though. He gulped again.
If there is, I'm coming down, okay?
His first step onto the stairs was slow, and the wood creaked noisily. If there was anyone, they'd hear him and have plenty of time to prepare an ambush, long before he arrived at the bottom. There was only one exit from the cellar, so the only way out was past him. This fact really did not ease his anxiety as he moved further down the steps. As he reached the bottom, he took a small sigh of relief. Well, at least none of them broke or anything like that. The stairs themselves were evidently built sturdier than they looked or sounded. Despite almost 20 years of neglect, 5 years of it from being when Eve inherited it until she came back to it, they had stayed firm and resisted vandals and pests. He still had a lot of work to do, even here, but at least he didn't need to worry about the various stairs or the manor collapsing while he was working on it. He smiled as he looked at the workmanship, when suddenly his eye spied something sitting off the floor.
Wait a minute, what's that?
It appeared to be a long box, like a stretched-out hexagon, laying flat on the small elevating platform of shoddily built wood. As he watched, the lid of the box started to rise, and Tony felt that it reminded him of something, but he couldn't think of what. Then as a hand grasped at the lip of the box, he realized just why it seemed so familiar. All those horror movies he had watched as a kid, with the sheet over the television in the living room, all those terrifying comics he read with a flashlight under the covers. It was a coffin. The arm was covered above the wrist by satin material, decorated with various imagery of, curiously, bunnies. Despite some far part of his mind thinking that last bit being amusing, he shook in place, unable to tear away his eyes as the being rose up, its body facing toward him, stretching out its arms as it woke. It was leaning up now, and strangely, holding a teddy bear.
Well, that was a pleasant nap.
Mortimer said sleepily. Tony's horror turned to confusion as the older man looked around but still had not noticed him. He seemed pleased, relaxed.
Now, back to...
Tony felt a sudden urge to say something, but was still too shocked from the bizarreness of his situation.
War?
Mortimer had noticed Tony now, and was now slapping a hand onto his own face.
Oh, bloody 9 hells.
Mortimer's vocal intonation showed his annoyance as he climbed out of the coffin, and looking over at the youth, spoke.
What are you doing here?
Tony's mouth moved with inhibition as he simply said whatever came to mind in his fear of the man's presence.
I heard a noise when I went by the door leading to here, so I opened the door and asked if anyone was down here, but you didn't answer, so I walked down the steps and I saw your bed, or whatever it is, which looks like a coffin, by the way, and...
Mortimer leaned against the coffin, his arms crossed and his head tilted down.
That's pretty creepy, but then I saw you lift the lid and raise it out of it like some...
Tony's speech slowed while his eyes wandered over the man before him, his gaze falling on several prominent features. Pointed ear.
Kind of freaky.
Tony's finger curled faintly as his subconscious was piecing things together. Mortimer's eyes had a faintly red tinge to them in the shadow, less brown than they had appeared in the lamplight, with its lightly orange tint cast on everything. He knew that some albinos had red or pink eyes, but he doubted that this was the case here. He grew more worried and just had to know that his fears were unfounded. He looked at the man's mouth, his teeth clearly being gritted, but that wasn't the problem. The canine teeth on both upper and lower jaw were far, far sharper than those normally found in humans. Tony spoke the name of what he was facing.
Vampire.
He silenced immediately, and the air suddenly chilled as Mortimer ceased his leaning and faced the intruder with a look of irritation and, there Tony suggested, mild fear. Fear of discovery, perhaps? As the man took a step closer, Tony let loose a light gasp of shock and pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please don't eat me.